Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are we getting on? Welcome to a brand new Fallout 76 video. So, as you may have heard, 4-star legendary gear will be arriving in the game very, very soon, as of early December. And this is all on the public test server now, so we can take a look at all the available effects for your weapons, your armour and your power armour that will be coming with this update. So if you're wondering on how to get hold of 4-star gear, the primary way of doing this will be via the new raid system. There will be randomly spawning 4-star legendary creatures around the wasteland, so if you happen to bump into one of those, you can get 4-star legendary gear from then. But otherwise, you'll have to pursue the new raid content, the first of which will be the Gleaming Depths. This will all be arriving in December as well. And that should, I suspect, drop either one or multiple guaranteed 4-star legendary items you can either keep or recycle via the new legendary crafting system. And I'm somewhat speculative on the Gleaming Depth stuff and the raid stuff because Bethesda have seen fit to put this together in such a way as to exclude the solo player from this new endgame content. So, as such, I and plenty of other people cannot take part in it, which really sucks, to be honest. So, 'tis what it is, but yeah, that's going to really limit my coverage. However, we can dive in and take a look at the legendary effects, so let's do that. Okay, so kicking things off with weapons. Let's have a look at what we've got. So, we'll grab one of my personal favourites. This is my handmade rifle, and we'll take a little gander at this. I've named it Will of the People. It would normally have a communist skin on it, so that makes slightly more sense, but it's currently got the Screaming Eagle one on. But let's have a little look at these 4-star legendary mods that we can see down here. I don't have any of them, obviously, but we can at least take a look at them. So first up, bullies. And I like this one. When attacking outside of VATS, deal 50% bonus weak point damage. So this is kind of perfect for me in a way, because I never use VATS, and I almost always go for the head. So yeah, when free aiming and aiming for the head, getting an extra 50% bonus damage will be absolutely brilliant. I think that's a really strong start. And got to say, some of these effects that they've picked for the 4th star are looking really, really promising. There are a couple of duds in there, inevitably, but there are some really cool options, and this is a strong start. Obviously, weak points do vary somewhat by the creature you're attacking, but generally, that means if you're not using VATS and you're aiming for the head, bullies will be quite handy for you. So conductors. Critical hits restore 5% of health and AP for player and teammates within a 50-meter radius. So this one's obviously geared more towards group-centric stuff, but also it'll affect you directly as well, and gets built with the new raids in mind. But restoring health and AP for crits is nice, only 5%, so it's not particularly big. Mind you, there is a tendency with the new changes that are coming in December. There's a load of perk changes. I'll link those around, by the way, for you as well coming. But one of the things those perk changes are doing is increasing the viability of crit-heavy builds. So this will potentially be quite useful for them. I think there's some better options, but it's not a bad start. Electricians, when reloading, emit a shockwave that stuns nearby targets for 5 seconds, but with a 10-second cooldown. Probably more useful on things like, say, Gatling lasers that have massive magazines on them. Because if you're reloading a lot, something like, say, this 20-shot handmade will reload too often to trigger it half the time, or more than half the time. So, limiting the use. But for things that you only reload every so often, like, you know, things with big magazines like heavy guns, I can see that being handy on occasion. They also have slow reload times, those sorts of guns, so a little stun will keep the bad guys off you. Not the best one, but it does have its use, that I think. Encirclers. This is an interesting one. The greater the number of combat targets around you, the greater your damage output. So, when you're outnumbered, you'll do more damage. That's got to be handy. Obviously situational, but as it scales with the number of enemies around you, the more trouble you're in, the more damage you're going to do. So it gets more useful the more trouble you're in, which makes a lot of sense and kind of makes it even more useful. Obviously we haven't got numbers showing here as to what sort of percentages and things like that, but that is definitely a potentially helpful thing, as we do often end up quite severely outnumbered in the game, so I can see that being useful. Fracturers. When crippling limbs, they explode and deal up to 150 explosion damage to nearby targets. Potentially useful. My question is whether or not crippling limbs includes crippling heads. Depending on context, sometimes it appears like these things do, sometimes it doesn't, as we'll come back to in a subsequent mod, but that could potentially be quite handy if you're doing a lot of headshots, assuming it affects that. Otherwise, perhaps a little less. And also potential to tag enemies you don't really want. I wouldn't combine that with instigating, for example. but maybe a little situational, but interesting. Pinpointers. 25% damage increase when targeting enemy limbs. So that says arms and legs. Doesn't say heads, which makes me think maybe not heads? Don't know. Handy, I think, given that I free aim, I'd go for bullies over pinpointers. It also does more damage anyway. This one, on the other hand, will take effect when you're using VATs. I mean, hitting the limbs is easier in VATs, so with the lower skill threshold, perhaps that's why it's got the lower damage output. Polished. This is an interesting one. The greater the equip's item condition, plus 100% here, the greater the weapon damage, up to 60%. So anything above 100% weapon condition, because this weapon is over 100%, then you do up to 60% extra damage. This is a really good one to combine with the Weapon Artisan perk, because it means between 200 and 100%, you'll always be doing the maximum damage increase. And then as soon as it drops below that, you can just repair it, and it'll bump back up to the top again. Whereas if you're not using Weapon Artisan, you'll be steadily losing damage output over time. That drop-off won't kick in until much later if you have the 200% bonus, so pretty handy that. Pyromaniacs. When a combat target is burning, deal 50% bonus damage. Situational, depends whether or not your weapon's doing fire damage, I would guess. But if you've got a flamethrower, this would be particularly handy and would make a great deal of sense. So yeah, simple, but in its particular situations, probably a good one, that one. 50% damage against legendary and raid combatants with the Slayers mod. Basically, in the raids, the new content that are coming in December. And against any legendary enemies, extra damage. Handy, but very situational. You'd only really want that on a weapon used for a specific job. So not the best, but potentially situationally useful. Improves weapon recoil and stability by 50%. Stabilizers. Now, recoil and stability, we have plenty of mods you can attach to your weapon anyway to improve that, and it's not that difficult to deal with. I think it's more of a console useful one, that one, if you're using a controller. Yeah, not the best. Vipers, well, if you happen to be doing poison damage, potentially handy, but probably one of the less useful ones, I suspect. Not many people are doing poison damage to enemies, I don't think. Okay, and that would be the lot then. So, let's have a look at a couple of other different weapon types while we're on that subject. So, looking at the heavy weapons, it looks like the options are all the same. Switching over to a flamer here, so yep, that's cool. So let's take a look at melee weapons, because those are different. So I've grabbed my anti-armor Grognax axe here. This is currently set up as a 3-star. I quite like this thing. It's kind of a fun idea. It's a pity that up until now anyway, melee weapons are not the best in this game, but we've got some overlap here, but some that are new as well. So outside of that, still 50% weak point damage. This is less useful for a melee weapon, I think, because hitting those weak points is a bit harder. Combo breakers, dealing damage, 50% chance not to use AP, so this is more of a VATS thing, only 10% on auto melee weapons, but those do a lot more individual hits. Obviously, they spin faster, so that does make a lot more sense. But yeah, this one would be a little bit more useful. If you're using VATS, then yeah, less AP use is definitely handy. Critical hits restore 5% of health and AP for player and teammates within radius. Conductors is the same as before. Encirclers, same as before again. Fencers. Don't know that I'd have gone for that name, but it's fine. 10% melee damage when one or more teammates are nearby, so basically a damage buff if you happen to be on a team. Again, definitely that team-centric thing that Bethesda seem to be leaning into at the moment, and is completely useless to me. Fractures. When crippling limbs, they explode and deal damage to nearby targets. So this one's slightly more handy because there's a tendency to hit arms and stuff, particularly with a two-handed melee weapon like this. So I could see that one going off and being a lot more useful, although there's a question about splashing onto yourself there. Iceman's applies cryo damage that slows targets, but only in VATS. I wish this wasn't only in VATS, it would be more useful then, but still, cryo damage is definitely a helpful thing. It's useful on other weapons that have it, and I think that's probably a good one to pick up. Just pity about the VATS thing. That might change. It's on the public test server as we speak, though, so who knows. Worth a gander in-game if you want to look at this sort of thing. But anything that slows down enemies is a win. Polished. So again, this is weapon condition again. The better the weapon condition, the more damage it does. And again, combined with the Weapon Artisan perk, that means that 50% of your weapon's condition will do maximum damage, the extra 60% buff. So definitely a good combo there. Pounders. 10% damage after each consecutive melee hit on same combat target, doing up to a maximum of 100% damage. So this is basically Furious, but for melee weapons. So yeah, probably more useful on the automatic ones because you get those 10 hits in faster and buffing up to the 100% compared to, say, something like this with a really low swing speed. But yeah, a double damage buff on sort of boss slayer type weapons like your auto axe or your chainsaw would be particularly effective, I think. It would be a great time to have that extra damage buff. So potentially a good one for those automatic weapons, I think that. Pyromaniacs, bonus damage to burning targets. Slayers, again, in the raids and against legendaries, basically the same as we saw before. Vipers, against poisoned enemies, that's the same as well. So, time to jump on and have a look at armour. Okay, so we'll take a look at my Brotherhood of Steel Recon armour set here. That's what I've currently got on, and it's 3 stars, so that works quite nicely. If you're wondering, this is Alaskan winter paint on this set, and yes, it really does look very, very cool. So, yeah, one to keep an eye out for. It was an old season reward, though, so unless it appears on the Atomic Shop, it may be a bit difficult to get your hands on. So there's a little FYI, because I do get asked. Let's have a look at these mods, though. So, Battle Loaders, 15% chance to instantly reload when bashing enemies, up to 75% chance on a full stack. So, this can go on all of your armour pieces, and therefore increase the chance that you will instantly reload when you bash an enemy. Not a bad effect, that one. Not the most useful, but free reloads most of the time would not be terrible. Depends how long your reload is, really. If you've got something that takes a long time to reload, and you've got this on all of your armour, a quick whack and a fast reload would be really handy, actually. So bruisers, melee weapons deal 5% bonus damage up to 25% on a full stack. So yeah, if you are going for a melee build, you can put this on all of your armour if you so desire and increase that damage. Limit breaking. Each worn armour piece reduces the cost of critical hits by 10% up to 50% on a full stack. So reducing the cost of critical hits means you will be able to do them more often. Again, the changes to perks are making a crit-heavy build a more viable prospect going forward, or they will when this all drops in December. So this would potentially be good if you want to really go for a VATS critical-heavy build. It would be a good combo to add limit breaking to your armour. Miasmas. When hit, i.e. receiving damage, a poisonous damage over time cloud harms nearby targets for 10 seconds. Dot damage increases based on the number of items with this effect on. So the more Miasma's gear you have on, the more damage you're doing to attackers, which is quite handy. Mole Rats. This is a funny one. HP regenerates slowly while indoors. I like the Mole Rat's name, it makes me laugh, but as an effect, it's borderline useless, this one, because there's so many other ways to get a passive health regen, as long as you're not in combat, and this is just a bit of a waste, really. Rangers, though, deals 5% bonus damage up to 25 on full set of armour if you're using a ranged weapon, so handy. Runners, AP sprinting cost reduced by 20% while outdoors, up to 100% on a full stack. Reduce AP for running is always nice, but maybe a nice to have rather than a priority. Potentially slightly more useful for melee builds because you can get up to enemies more easily, but still. And tankies, standing still nullifies ballistic damage by 15% for 10 seconds with a 20-second cooldown, and it stacks up to 75%. Not bad if you're going to be standing still, probably more for a melee build, I think, to nullify some of that damage, but it's only ballistic damage, so it's a bit specific, although most damage is ballistic, so, well, a lot of it is, so swings and roundabouts, but some good stuff in there. So, jumping over to power armor, I had to go really hunt down something for this one, because none of my power armor is actually legendary. I've never felt the slightest inclination to have legendary power armor, but here are the new effects, some of them overlap. This one reduces incoming damage for all teammates within 50 meters by 5% up to 25% on a full stack. So damage reduction for you and your teammates. Potentially useful if that's the sort of thing you're going to want to do, particularly in the new raids, the Gleaming Depths and so on. That will be quite handy because they are supposed to be very difficult for endgame players or group of endgame players. So I could see the appeal of this one if you're running through that with power armor on. Battle Loaders, as before, when bashing enemies, chance to reload. This is the same thing. Bruisers, melee weapons deal 5% bonus damage up to 25% on a full stack. Okay, extra melee damage, seen that before as well. Choo-choos, 10% chance for 500 damage and bloody mess effect when sprinting into targets, up to 50% chance on a full stack. So that could potentially make Pain Train really quite useful, although it is only a 50% at most. I actually use Pain Train, but it's guaranteed to trigger and do a very small amount of damage. This would potentially buff that amount of damage. Fun, bit more of a nice to have rather than an actually really useful thing though, I think. Limit breaking, coming back to this one from before with the armour, this basically increases the number of criticals you can do. Miasmas, poisonous miasma around you when you take damage. Mole rats is internal, we've seen that one before as well. Propelling, movement speed increased by 5% and up to 25% on a full stack. So running faster, that's kind of appealing, I think, particularly with some of the content that you want to absolutely blast through, especially if you're grinding stuff. Then being able to run faster would not be the worst thing ever. Definitely handy for a grinding loadout, I suppose. Radioactive power, this is a new one. Gain 2 AP regen at the cost of rads, up to 10 AP on full stack. So your AP will regenerate faster, your action points, but you will gain rads as you do. This actually kind of reminds me of something like Stalker or something like that, where you get rads in exchange for another benefit. Although in this case, less dangerous. Might be useful for ghouls though, when those drop next year. Taking rad damage over time will basically be a healing effect, so... or at least we think so anyway. So that would be quite useful, I think, for them. Rangers is increased ranged weapon damage, which is helpful for a lot of builds, I think. And Reflective reflects 10% of damage received back towards an enemy. So let's get that back up, because for some reason it disappeared. And it can stack up to 50% being reflected back on a full set of power armor with this effect on. So yeah, not bad. There's a big tendency in this update to lean towards reflected damage. There's a whole lot of perks that are modified that contain that effect, so interesting combination there. Rejuvenators gradually restores wearers and teammates health and AP within a 50-meter radius, so also not bad, and it's not conditional either, so definitely potentially useful, that one. I could see that having a bit of appeal. Runners, AP cost reduced while running outdoors, potentially useful, but again, more of a nice to have than a first choice, I think. Scanners, AP cost of VATS attacks reduced by 10% up to 50% on a full stack. So yeah, multiple armor pieces stacking here again. And again, if you want to do a VATS heavy build, especially if you want to do a crit heavy build, more attacks means more opportunity to get crits, so not too bad. Stalwart is plus 50 damage and energy resistance to user and teammates within 50 meters, maxing out at 250. That's pretty good. Anti-armor doesn't bypass that either, so that could potentially be quite useful again for that end-game content and just for anybody who runs groups, really. So yeah, definitely a potentially useful one. And tanky, standing still nullifies ballistic damage, as we saw earlier. And there we have it, all of the 4-star legendary effects. Now, some of these might change slightly between now and launch, although I wouldn't expect a lot of differences there. There's some really well designed, in terms of actually being effective and valuable to a player, effects in there, so I think there's some good stuff there. To go a little bit negative for a minute, which I really wish I didn't have to do, but I feel I do. I'm not overly sold on the value of 4-star legendaries at all as a concept. I think the game's already way too easy. I know there are people who disagree, but it's way too easy. That's all there is to it. So this is only going to exacerbate that situation and make it easier and make combat even more trivial. So yeah, I don't think this is necessarily a good change from that point of view. And the fact that the content that you engage with to get 4-star legendaries, i.e. the new raid content, is only group-centric and you cannot do it as a solo player is, well, this sort of thing is the reason I have quit games in the past. And yeah, I think it's a bloody awful choice, to be completely honest with you, and I absolutely hate it. So yeah, future content on this is going to be sparse, to say the least. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that, and I do wish I didn't have to be so negative, but yeah. I'm not very enthusiastic about a lot of the changes that are coming to the game at the moment, I have to admit, and this particular setup I think is not good for the game overall. Anyway, I hope you guys found that useful and informative, and here's hoping that on down the line things will pick up again. They usually do, we have our ups and downs. If you did enjoy the video, please consider dropping subs and likes, I very much appreciate. Social media links down below, channel memberships as well if you want to support the channel that way. I massively appreciate that, it really helps out. And if you get a chance to join us for live streams as well, we are, of course, playing Little 76, and we're playing some other bits and pieces as well. As I mentioned earlier, been loving the Stalker series. We're playing some Fallout adjacent stuff, we're playing a little bit of Starfield, and there's so much stuff on the horizon that it's absolutely bananas at the minute, so join us for those if you get the chance. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to speaking to you all very, very soon.